The first time Isolde Mercer called me the love of her life, I nearly dropped a champagne glass worth more than my monthly grocery budget. "This is him," she said. Her fingers slid through my arm. Confident. Effortless. Like she belonged there. Like I belonged there. The love of my life. The ballroom went silent. Or maybe that was just my brain. Either way, every member of the Mercer family was staring at me. And I had absolutely no idea why. For context, I was not the love of Isolde Mercer's life. I wasn't even sure she liked me. My name is Ronan Ashcombe. I was 36 years old. Director of Crisis Management at Mercer's Strategic Group. A title that basically meant people called me when everything had already gone wrong. I fixed disasters. Negotiated impossible situations. Cleaned up problems nobody else wanted. And for the last 4 years, I had worked directly under Isolde Mercer. Our relationship was simple. We argued. We challenged each other. We occasionally spent 12 hours trapped in conference rooms trying to save failing projects. And somewhere along the way, she became the most frustrating woman I'd ever met. She was also the smartest. I tried not to think about that too often. Especially because Isolde Mercer wasn't the kind of woman men casually developed feelings for. She was the kind of woman entire rooms adjusted themselves around. 34 years old. Founder and CEO. Sharp enough to dismantle weak arguments in under 30 seconds. Elegant enough to make it look effortless. She never raised her voice. Never lost control. Never showed uncertainty. At least not at work. Which was why the phone call 3 days earlier had confused me. I had been halfway through making dinner when my phone rang. Isolde Mercer. I stared at it. She didn't call after business hours. She sent emails. Calendar invites. Occasionally messages containing phrases like, "Need this fixed," or "Call me immediately." That was the extent of our social relationship. Still answered. "Please tell me the building isn't on fire." Silence. Then, "Are you busy Saturday?" I frowned. "That depends on whether this conversation ends with me volunteering for something terrible." Another pause. Then a sigh. Not the irritated sigh she used at work. A different one. Tired. Almost nervous. The sound alone made me sit up straighter. "I need a favor." Now I was concerned. Isolde didn't ask for favors. She assigned responsibilities. What kind of favor? Another pause. Longer this time. Then, "I need you to come to a wedding with me." I blinked. "A wedding?" "Yes." "Your wedding?" "No." "But," because that would raise several follow-up questions. To my surprise, she laughed. A real laugh. But real. "I need you to attend my brother's wedding." I waited. There was clearly more. Eventually she said, "As my boyfriend." Silence. I stared at the wall. Then at my phone. Then back at the wall. Just to make sure reality hadn't malfunctioned. "Come again." "My family thinks I'm bringing someone." "Someone." "Someone." I sat down. Slowly. "Isolde." "Yes." "You don't have a boyfriend." "I'm aware." "Then why does your family think you do?" The silence that followed told me everything. I rubbed my forehead. "Oh no." "What?" "You told them you did." Another pause. Then, "Possibly." "Possibly." "Strongly." I laughed despite myself. This was absurd. Completely absurd. And yet something in her voice stopped me from immediately saying no. Because beneath the confidence, beneath the control, she sounded vulnerable. That was new. Dangerously new. "Why me?" The answer came instantly. "Because I trust you." The words landed harder than they should have. I wasn't prepared for that. Neither was she apparently. Because silence immediately followed. The kind that felt too honest. Too revealing. Eventually I cleared my throat. "Trust me to do what?" "Not embarrass me." That's a remarkably low standard. "I know." Another pause. Then softer. "And because you're the only person I wanted to ask." That one stayed with me. Long after the call ended. Long after I agreed. Long after I should have stopped thinking about it. Saturday arrived far too quickly. Isolde picked me up personally. That alone should have warned me something was different. At work she usually delegated things, including me. But that morning she was waiting outside my apartment. And for a moment I forgot how words worked. Because I'd never seen her like this before. At work, Isolde lived in tailored suits and impossible confidence. Today she wore a dark emerald dress. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders. Sunlight caught the gold undertones. And suddenly I understood why magazines paid ridiculous amounts of money for photographs. She lowered her sunglasses, looked at me, and smiled. "You're staring." I blamed the sunlight. Interesting defense. I stand by it. The smile widened slightly. Victory. Well, dangerous. We started driving. For nearly 20 minutes neither of us spoke. Then she said, "My ex-fiancé will be there." There was the real reason. I glanced over. "You were eventually going to mention that." "He and my brother remained friends." I nodded. That explained a lot. "Still in love with you?" Her fingers tightened slightly around the steering wheel. "Probably." That wasn't the answer of someone who enjoyed the situation. "Do you still love him?" The question escaped before I could stop it. Immediately I regretted it. Too personal. Too direct. Too revealing. But Isolde didn't seem offended. She looked out the windshield. Quiet. Thoughtful. Then she said, "No." One word. Certain. Final. Something unexpectedly relieved settled in my chest. I ignored it. The rest of the drive passed in comfortable silence. Until we reached the venue. And that's when things became strange. Because the moment we arrived, people recognized me. Not from work. From her family. Which made absolutely no sense. An older woman hugged me before I even reached the entrance. A cousin greeted me by name. Someone asked whether I still took my coffee black. I stopped walking. Completely. "Isolde." She froze. "Yes." "Why does your family know things about me?" Her expression changed. Just slightly. Enough to make my instincts wake up. Interesting. Very interesting. Before she could answer, another voice interrupted. Amused. Dangerous. A silver-haired woman appeared beside us. Elegant. Watching everything. She looked me up and down. Then smiled. "Oh." I didn't like that "oh." Not even a little. She turned toward Isolde. Then back toward me. And said the words that would haunt me for the rest of the weekend. "So you're finally Ronan." Finally. Not "nice to meet you." Not "who are you." Finally. As though she'd been expecting me. For a very long time. And suddenly I wasn't wondering why Isolde had brought me anymore. I was wondering how many conversations about me had happened before I ever arrived. And why nobody seemed surprised to see me. The word finally followed me for the rest of the afternoon. Not because Isolde's grandmother had said it dramatically. Quite the opposite. She'd said it casually. Like someone commenting on the weather. Like she hadn't just dropped a mystery into my lap and walked away smiling. The wedding ceremony itself started 20 minutes later. Unfortunately, that gave me 20 minutes to think. And the more I thought about it, the less sense any of this made. I sat beside Isolde in the second row. Her family filled the surrounding seats. Her younger brother, Gideon, stood at the altar looking equal parts nervous and happy. The chapel glowed with warm afternoon sunlight streaming through stained glass windows. Everything looked beautiful. Everything felt normal. Except for the fact that half the Mercer family appeared to know who I was. And I had never met any of them before today. I leaned slightly toward Isolde. "Your grandmother called me finally." She kept her eyes forward. "I heard." "Would you like to explain that?" "No." "Excellent. Thank you." "I wasn't complimenting you." A tiny smile touched her mouth. "Victory. Small but satisfying." Then the music began. The bride entered. And conversation became impossible. For the next hour, I did my best to focus on the ceremony. Unfortunately, every time I glanced toward Isolde, I found another reason not to. Because she looked different here. Softer. Not weaker. Never weaker. Just less guarded. At work she carried authority like armor. Here she looked like a daughter. A sister. A woman trying to survive a family gathering without being emotionally ambushed. which explained why she'd asked me to come. At least partly. Still didn't explain why her family knew my coffee order. The ceremony ended to applause. Guests began filing toward the reception ballroom. And that's when I finally met Damien Vale. I'd spotted him earlier. Tall, well-dressed, confident. The kind of man magazines described as effortlessly handsome. Personally, I suspected considerable effort was involved. Nobody maintained that jawline accidentally. He approached with a smile already in place. Ronan. I shook his hand. Damien. His grip was firm. Not aggressive. Just deliberate. Evaluating. The same way mine probably was. We were two men trying very hard to appear relaxed. Neither succeeding completely. Isolde's told me a lot about you. I nearly laughed. Apparently everyone had. Hopefully the printable version. His smile widened. I always liked your sense of humor. That stopped me. Because that implied something. Something very specific. I looked at Isolde. She suddenly found a floral arrangement fascinating. Interesting. Very interesting. Damien noticed. Of course he did. The man looked observant enough to spot tension from orbit. I'll let you two settle in, he said smoothly. Then he walked away, leaving me with more questions than answers. Isolde. No. I haven't asked anything yet. I know what's coming. Then save us both time. She sighed. The kind of sigh that suggested she already regretted this entire weekend. Later. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. Before I could argue further, another woman appeared. Early 60s. Elegant. Warm smile. Sharp eyes. Definitely Isolde's mother. The resemblance was unmistakable. She wrapped Isolde in a hug. Then turned toward me. And immediately hugged me too. Without warning. Without permission. Without hesitation. You're taller than I expected. I blinked. What exactly did you expect? She patted my cheek. I don't know. Then she smiled. Maybe someone less handsome. Isolde groaned. Mother. What? Please stop evaluating him like produce. I'm not. She turned back to me. I already approved. I looked at Isolde. Isolde looked at the ceiling, clearly abandoning me to my fate. Her mother linked her arm through mine. Come sit with us. I had a feeling that wasn't actually a request. The reception was held in a grand ballroom overlooking rolling vineyards. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Music drifted softly through the room. Guests laughed. Servers moved between tables carrying champagne. Everything felt elegant. Sophisticated. Expensive. I was halfway through my first glass of wine when things became even stranger. Because Isolde's mother began telling stories. About me. Stories I had never told her. Stories I had told Isolde. Months ago. Sometimes years ago. A disastrous client meeting in Denver. A hotel elevator breakdown. The time I'd accidentally locked myself on a rooftop during a site inspection. Every story came from conversations I'd had with Isolde. Private conversations. Work conversations. The realization hit me slowly. Then all at once. She'd remembered them. All of them. I looked across the table. Isolde refused to meet my eyes. Her grandmother noticed immediately. Of course she did. The woman missed nothing. She sipped her champagne. Then smiled. A small knowing smile. I suddenly understood why people feared her. Hours passed. Dinner arrived. Speeches followed. The reception settled into that warm, comfortable rhythm unique to weddings. And for a while I stopped analyzing everything. Stopped asking questions. Stopped trying to solve Isolde Mercer. It was surprisingly pleasant. Until the father-daughter dance. Because halfway through the music, Isolde's father approached our table. May I borrow my daughter? Isolde smiled. A genuine smile. Rare enough to be startling. Always. They walked onto the dance floor. The room softened around them. Conversation faded. People watched. And for the first time all day, Isolde looked completely unguarded. Her father said something. She laughed. Then rested her head briefly against his shoulder. The sight did something unexpected to me. It made me realize how little I actually knew about her. 4 years working together. Countless meetings. Business trips. Late-night project crises. And somehow I'd only learned the professional version. Not this one. Not the woman dancing with her father. Not the woman who laughed more around her family. Not the woman who apparently talked about me often enough for relatives to recognize me. A chair scraped beside me. I turned. Damien. He sat down calmly. I loved her. Direct. No warning. No preamble. I appreciated that. Even if I didn't like where the conversation was heading. I gathered. He nodded. For several seconds he watched Isolde dance. Then he said quietly, "She never loved me the way I loved her." I didn't respond. Because that felt dangerous. And because something in his voice sounded honest. Not bitter. Just sad. I spent years thinking if I did everything right, she'd eventually get there. His gaze remained fixed on the dance floor. But some people already belong somewhere else. That got my attention. I turned toward him. What does that mean? A smile appeared. Well, knowing. The kind I was rapidly learning to distrust. You'll figure it out. I hated when people did that. Everyone in this family seemed determined to communicate exclusively through riddles. Before I could press further, Damien stood, straightened his jacket, and left, leaving me alone with yet another mystery. Wonderful. When the dance ended, Isolde returned. I studied her carefully. She noticed immediately. Why are you looking at me like that? Your ex just said something cryptic. She closed her eyes. Of course he did. You sound unsurprised. Damien enjoys emotional puzzles. Apparently your entire family does. That earned a laugh. A real one. Bright enough to make me momentarily forget my irritation. Dangerous woman. Very dangerous. Later that evening, guests began drifting onto the terrace outside. The sun had set. Hundreds of tiny lights glowed above the vineyard. Music floated through the warm night air. The atmosphere felt intimate, romantic, which would have been fine if I hadn't been pretending to date my boss. I stepped outside for fresh air. A few minutes later, Isolde joined me. Neither of us spoke immediately. We stood side by side overlooking the vineyard. Comfortable silence. The kind we rarely had at work. Eventually she said, "Thank you." I glanced over. For what? For coming. The honesty in her voice caught me off guard. No problem. It is a problem. I frowned. She folded her arms, looking out toward the darkness. I know this weekend is strange. That's one word for it. A smile tugged at her lips, then faded. I really do appreciate it. Something about the way she said it felt important. More important than the words themselves. For a moment she looked tired. Not physically. Emotionally. Like she'd been carrying something heavy for a long time. Before I could ask, another voice interrupted. Naturally. Found you. We both turned. Her grandmother. The tiny woman approached holding a champagne flute. Looking entirely too pleased with herself. She stopped beside us. Examined me thoughtfully. Then said, "You know, Ronan?" I immediately disliked where this was going. "You're even better looking than the photographs." Silence. Absolute silence. I slowly turned toward Isolde. Isolde froze. Completely. For the first time all weekend. Actual panic. Interesting. Very interesting. I looked back at Evelyn Mercer. Photographs. The older woman smiled. A wicked smile. The smile of someone who had just thrown a match into a fireworks factory. Then she patted my arm and walked away, leaving me standing there, staring at Isolde, who suddenly seemed very interested in the vineyard. Isolde. No. Photographs. It sounds worse than it is. That is never a reassuring sentence. She groaned softly. I folded my arms. Waiting. Finally she sighed. Long defeated. Then she looked up at me. And for the first time since this weekend started, she looked genuinely nervous. Which should have reassured me. Instead it raised an entirely different question. Because Isolde Mercer didn't get nervous. Especially not around me. So why was she now? And more importantly, how many photographs of me had she shown her family? I slept badly. Not because the hotel room was uncomfortable. It wasn't. The Mercer family had booked an entire luxury resort for the wedding weekend. My room was larger than my apartment's living room. The bed was perfect. The pillows were perfect. The silence was perfect. Unfortunately, my thoughts were not. I spent half the night staring at the ceiling thinking about one question. Photographs. Plural. Not a photograph. Not a picture from a company event someone happened to see online. Photographs. Enough for her grandmother to casually reference them. Enough for her grandmother to know exactly who I was before we'd ever met. Enough for her family to recognize me on sight. Which led to an even more unsettling question. How often did Isolde talk about me? The next morning brought absolutely no answers. Only more confusion. I came downstairs to find the wedding brunch already underway. Guests filled the terrace overlooking the vineyard. The smell of coffee and fresh pastries drifted through the air. And seated near the center of everything was Isolde, looking impossibly composed, as if she hadn't spent the previous day destroying my understanding of reality. She looked up as I approached. Our eyes met. Something flickered across her expression. Gone almost immediately. But I caught it. Relief. Interesting. Very interesting. You look tired, she said. I blame your family. That's fair. I slid into the chair beside her. Immediately a cup of coffee appeared in front of me. But 2 sugars. Exactly how I drank it. I stared at the cup. Then at Isolde. Then at the cup again. Should I even ask? No. Good. Because I wasn't going to answer. I laughed despite myself. Across the table, a woman I recognized as one of Isolde's aunts smiled knowingly. I was beginning to hate knowing smiles. They were becoming far too common. The morning progressed pleasantly enough. Until Isolde left to help her brother and his new wife with something. The second she disappeared, I felt eyes on me. Several sets of eyes. I looked up. Half her family was staring. Not subtly. Not accidentally. Openly. Like researchers observing a rare animal. That's unsettling, I said. Her aunt laughed. You have no idea. I pointed toward the direction Isolde had gone. What exactly has she been telling all of you? The entire table became suspiciously interested in their food. Which was answer enough. Oh, come on. Nobody spoke. Then a familiar voice saved them. Or doomed them. Depending on perspective. He's earned the truth. Grandmother Evelyn. Of course. The woman settled into the empty seat beside me. Collected. Dangerous. I was beginning to suspect she enjoyed causing trouble. Actually, I was certain of it. Her aunt groaned. Evelyn. What? Don't start. The older woman ignored her completely. Her attention remained fixed on me. Then she smiled. How much do you know? Apparently nothing. That sounds accurate. I rubbed my forehead. I'm serious. So am I. That was somehow worse. For several moments she studied me. Then finally she said, Do you know what my granddaughter talks about when she's worried? I frowned. No. You. I blinked. What? When she's frustrated. The pause. You. Another pause. When she's angry. You. I stared. Evelyn took a leisurely sip of coffee. Completely unbothered by the emotional grenade she'd just thrown. Around us, family members suddenly looked very uncomfortable. Like they desperately wished this conversation wasn't happening. Unfortunately for them, it was. That's not normal, I said slowly. No. It really isn't. No. I looked toward the vineyard. Then back at her. Why? The older woman smiled. Not teasing. Not amused. Almost affectionate. Because for years, Ronan, you have been her favorite subject. The world seemed to tilt slightly. Not dramatically. Just enough. Enough to make everything feel different. Years. Years. I opened my mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. Nothing came out. Because honestly, I had no idea what to do with that information. Evelyn watched my reaction carefully. Then nodded to herself. As though confirming something. What exactly did she say about me? The older woman laughed. Oh, everything. That wasn't helpful. Examples? She thought for a moment. Then, she told us about the hotel project in Seattle. I remembered that. A disaster involving contractors, permits, and 3 consecutive nights without sleep. She said you stayed until 4 in the morning helping her fix mistakes that weren't yours. I frowned. That wasn't unusual. It was to her. Before I could respond, Evelyn continued. Then there was the investor presentation. My stomach dropped. Oh no. Oh yes. I remembered that too. Isolde had been sick. Really sick. The kind of sick she tried to hide. I'd ended up handling half the presentation because she could barely stand. I hadn't thought much of it afterward. Apparently she had. She talked about that for months. Months. The word hit harder than it should have. Across the table, one of her cousins finally spoke. That story came up a lot. Another nodded. A lot. A third laughed. We all knew his name by then. My pulse did something strange. I didn't like it. Mostly because I did. The realization was slowly becoming impossible to ignore. These people knew me. Not because they'd met me. Not because they'd researched me. Because Isolde had spent years talking about me. Years. The thought refused to settle anywhere sensible. Then another voice joined the conversation. She carried a photograph once. Everyone froze. Even Evelyn. Interesting. I turned. Paige Mercer. Isolde's younger sister. She couldn't have been more than 28. Sharp. Mischievous. Clearly the family troublemaker. The grin on her face confirmed it. Paige, her aunt warned. What? The grin widened. He's going to find out eventually. My attention sharpened immediately. Find out what? The table collectively sighed. Paige looked delighted. Then she pointed directly at me. The company retreat photograph. I frowned. The what? You don't remember? No. Oh, this is amazing. She looked positively thrilled. Which worried me. Greatly. It was 3 years ago. She leaned forward. Your company retreat in Aspen. My memory stirred. So, corporate nonsense. Mandatory team-building exercises. One terrible karaoke night. Okay. Paige practically vibrated with excitement. There was a group photograph. I nodded slowly. Still confused. And Isolde kept it. Silence. I blinked. What? Framed. The silence became absolute. Complete. Total. Across the table, several relatives buried their faces in their hands. Evelyn looked deeply satisfied. Paige looked like Christmas had arrived early. And I sat there wondering whether I'd heard correctly. A framed photograph. Yes. Of an entire company. Technically. Something about her tone made my stomach drop. Technically. Paige's grin became evil. Oh, she cropped it. The table exploded. Not literally. But close. Laughter erupted from every direction. People groaned. Others covered their faces. Someone muttered, "Finally." I ignored them all. Because my attention had locked onto one detail. She cropped it? Paige nodded enthusiastically. Everyone else was removed. My brain stopped working. Completely. For several seconds. Maybe longer. The image formed anyway. A company photograph. Dozens of employees. And somehow, only me remaining. Impossible. Ridiculous. Absurd. Yet nobody at the table looked surprised. Embarrassed? Amused? Absolutely. Surprised? Not even slightly. Which meant it was true. I looked toward the hotel. Toward the building where Isolde had disappeared. Suddenly 100 moments from the past began rearranging themselves. Conversations. Books. Tiny things I'd never questioned. The way she'd always called me first during a crisis. The way she remembered details. The way she noticed things nobody else did. The way she trusted me long before I'd earned it. A dangerous possibility began forming. One I wasn't ready to examine. Fortunately, fate intervened. Or perhaps fate simply enjoyed watching me suffer. Because at that exact moment, Isolde returned. Carrying a stack of folders. Composed. Elegant. Unaware. She approached the table. Immediately noticed the silence, the tension, the expressions. Then her gaze found mine. Everything stopped. For 1 second. 2, 3. Understanding dawned. Slowly. Horribly. She looked at Paige. Paige smiled brightly. "Good morning." Isolde closed her eyes. The reaction alone told me everything. Everything. When she opened them again, her composure remained. Mostly. But a faint flush colored her cheeks. The first genuine embarrassment I'd ever seen from her. "Paige." "Yes." "What did you do?" Her sister pointed at me. I accelerated the plot. I laughed. I couldn't help it. The phrase was too perfect. Too accurate. Isolde looked ready to commit a felony. Then her eyes returned to mine. The room seemed to shrink. The noise faded. Everything narrowed. Just slightly. Enough. And for the first time since this wedding weekend began, neither of us looked away. There was something vulnerable in her expression. Something uncertain. Like she'd spent years hiding a secret and suddenly realized the walls had disappeared. I should have said something. Asked something. Done something. Instead I just looked at her. Because one realization kept repeating inside my head. She hadn't chosen me randomly. She hadn't called me because I was convenient. She hadn't brought me because I was available. Somewhere along the way, without either of us noticing, I had become important to her. Maybe far more important than either of us understood. And judging by the way Isolde was looking at me now, she was beginning to realize I knew it. If you've ever loved someone so quietly that everyone around you knew before you did, drop a like on this video right now, and tell me in the comments if you've ever found out someone felt that way about you. Because it was about to get a lot more complicated. For the rest of the morning, Isolde avoided being alone with me. Which, for a woman who normally faced billion-dollar negotiations without blinking, was surprisingly revealing. Not obvious avoidance. She was too skilled for that. It was subtle. Strategic. The kind of maneuver she would have admired in a boardroom. Every time I found myself near her, another family member appeared. A cousin. An aunt. Her father. At one point, even her grandmother somehow materialized between us, holding a plate of pastries and the expression of a woman protecting a very entertaining secret. I noticed. Isolde noticed that I noticed. Neither of us mentioned it. By lunchtime, the tension had become almost comical. Her sister certainly thought so. Paige spent most of the afternoon looking delighted, which meant I distrusted her completely. The wedding guests began leaving after lunch. Suitcases appeared. Valets brought cars around. Goodbyes filled the resort. The weekend was ending. And with every passing hour, I became increasingly aware of something uncomfortable. I didn't want it to end. That realization should have concerned me. Instead, it settled somewhere deep inside me with surprising certainty. Because the woman I'd spent 4 years working beside wasn't the same woman I'd met this weekend. Or perhaps she was. Perhaps this was simply the version she'd never allowed anyone at work to see. The thought followed me through the afternoon. And by evening, it became impossible to ignore. The Mercer family hosted one final dinner before everyone departed. Smaller this time. Just close relatives. A long table overlooking the vineyards. Golden suns. Soft music. The kind of setting that encouraged honesty. Which was unfortunate. Because honesty felt increasingly dangerous around Isolde. I arrived to find one empty chair remaining. Directly beside her. Of course. Her grandmother smiled when I sat down. I ignored her. Mostly because I suspected she'd enjoy being acknowledged. Dinner progressed pleasantly. Source. Laughter. Family memories. The usual chaos that seemed to follow the Mercers wherever they went. For a while, everything felt easy. Comfortable. Then Isolde's father asked a question. A simple question. One that changed everything. "So, Ronan." I looked up. "Sir? How long have you worked with my daughter?" "For years." He nodded thoughtfully. "And in all that time, did you ever notice how much she talks about you?" The table went silent. Instantly. Every conversation died. Every fork stopped moving. Even the music seemed quieter. I slowly turned toward Isolde. Her eyes closed. Briefly. Like a woman accepting her fate. "Father." What? Please stop helping. I'm helping. You absolutely are not. Laughter erupted around the table. But beneath it, something had shifted. Something important. Because nobody looked surprised by the question. Nobody looked confused. Nobody asked what he meant. Which meant they all already knew. Every single one of them. I glanced around the table. The smiles. The knowing looks. The amusement. Then back to Isolde. Suddenly I felt like the last person invited to a conversation that had started years ago. And judging by her expression, I wasn't wrong. Dinner ended shortly afterward. The sun disappeared below the horizon. Guests began drifting toward the resort, one by one, until eventually only a handful remained. Then even they left, leaving me alone on the terrace. Or so I thought. A minute later, footsteps approached. I didn't need to turn around. I already knew. Isolde stopped beside me. Neither of us spoke immediately. The vineyard stretched before us in darkness. Soft lights glowed among the rows of vines. The evening air carried traces of lavender and summer warmth. For several moments, we simply stood there. Then she sighed. I should probably explain. That depends. Her gaze shifted toward me. On what? Whether you plan to explain honestly. A surprised laugh escaped her. Quiet. Beautiful. Dangerous. I deserve that. Probably. Silence returned. Then she leaned against the railing. And for the first time all weekend, the armor disappeared. Not completely, but enough. Enough for me to see the woman underneath. The woman who rarely showed uncertainty. The woman who carried responsibility like a second skin. The woman who had somehow spent years talking about me without ever telling me why. I didn't realize it was that obvious. Her voice was softer now. More vulnerable. I found myself paying attention to every word. Your family knew my coffee order. Fair point. Your grandmother recognized me immediately. Also fair. You apparently owned a cropped photograph of me. She groaned. I was hoping nobody would mention that. I imagine so. A reluctant smile appeared. Then faded. The silence stretched. Eventually she looked toward the vineyards. Not at me. Almost as if the words would be easier that way. After Damien and I ended things. She stopped. Collected herself. Then continued. I didn't handle it well. Something about her honesty made me stand straighter. Because this wasn't the version of Isolde most people knew. This wasn't the CEO. This wasn't the woman who always had answers. This was someone showing me the messy parts. And that felt important. Everyone assumed I was fine, she said quietly. I let them. I nodded. That sounded like her. Very much like her. The truth was. She laughed once. Without humor. I wasn't. The admission hung between us. Unexpected. When people asked how I was doing, I changed the subject. Her fingers tightened slightly against the railing. And somehow the subject kept becoming you. I stared at her. Not speaking. Not interrupting. Because instinct told me this mattered. A lot. She smiled faintly. Still looking toward the darkness. You were always doing something ridiculous. That's unfair. It's accurate. I couldn't argue. Unfortunately. The smile returned briefly. Then softened. And every time I talked about you. Her voice grew quieter. I felt better. Something tightened in my chest. Dangerously. Isolde. She finally looked at me. And the vulnerability in her eyes nearly stole the words from my mouth. I never meant for it to become. She stopped. Searching. Trying to find language for something that clearly wasn't simple. Become what? The question emerged more gently than I'd intended. Her gaze held mine. Long, steady. Honest. Then she answered. You. For one suspended second, neither of us moved. The world narrowed. The vineyard disappeared. The sounds faded. Everything reduced to the woman standing in front of me. And the truth she just handed me. Not dramatically. Not with a grand confession. Just honestly. The way real truths often arrive. Quietly. Powerfully. Terrifyingly. I took a step closer. Not thinking. Simply moving. Her breath caught. Just slightly. Enough. Enough for hope to become dangerous. Isolde. My voice sounded rougher than usual. She noticed. Of course she did. She noticed everything. What? The word emerged almost as a whisper. I should have been careful. Should have considered consequences. Professional boundaries. Complications. All the practical reasons this was a terrible idea. Instead, I found myself focusing on something much simpler. The way she was looking at me. Like she'd spent years trying not to. Like she was finally tired of pretending. I think, I said slowly, you may have brought the wrong man to this wedding. Confusion flickered across her face. Then concern. Then uncertainty. What? I smiled. Well, careful. Because suddenly I understood something. The entire weekend she'd been afraid. Afraid I'd reject what she hadn't quite said. Afraid I'd see the truth and step away. Afraid she'd finally revealed too much. So I answered the fear instead. I don't think I'm pretending anymore. The silence that followed felt enormous. Her eyes widened. Just slightly. Then again. As though she couldn't quite believe what she'd heard. Ronan. I stepped closer. Close enough to see the gold flecks in her eyes. Close enough to hear her breathing. Close enough to make retreat impossible. You know what's funny? What? Her voice barely existed. I came here wondering why you picked me. A nervous smile touched her lips. And now I'm wondering why it took us this long. The smile broke. Fully. Beautifully. The kind that reached her eyes. The kind she'd never given anyone else. At least not that I'd seen. For one perfect moment, neither of us looked away. Then she laughed. So, relieved. Happy. And suddenly I wanted to hear that sound for the rest of my life. The realization hit hard enough to leave marks. Before I could examine it further, she reached for my hand. Tentatively. Almost cautiously. As if uncertain whether she still had permission. I intertwined our fingers immediately. The breath she released sounded suspiciously emotional. Mine probably did too. We stood there together. Hand in hand. No pretending. No audience. No performance. Just us. And for the first time all weekend, everything finally made sense. Or at least it did. Until my phone rang. The timing was almost impressively terrible. I glanced at the screen. Then frowned. The caller ID belonged to a recruiter I'd spoken with weeks earlier. Before the wedding. Before this. Before everything changed. I should have ignored it. Instead, I answered. 5 minutes later, my entire future looked different. When I ended the call, Isolde immediately noticed my expression. Concern appeared. What happened? I stared at the dark screen in my hand. Trying to process what I'd just heard. Trying to process the timing. Trying to process the impossible choice suddenly standing in front of me. Ronan. I looked at her. And for the first time that weekend, I didn't know what to say. Because 3,000 miles away, in Chicago, a major international consulting firm had just offered me the opportunity of a lifetime. An executive position. A salary that bordered on absurd. A chance to lead an entire division. The kind of opportunity people waited years for. The kind of opportunity nobody turned down. The kind of opportunity that would take me away from Isolde. Away from the company. Away from everything we just found. I want to think I weighed it carefully. In reality, I spent those 5 minutes doing what I always did under pressure. Running numbers, options, contingencies, every professional instinct I'd built over a decade of fixing other people's disasters. Except this time, the disaster was mine. I'd spent 4 years being the person other people called when their carefully built plans fell apart. I knew how to walk into chaos and find the exit. I just didn't know what to do when the chaos was a feeling, and the exit meant leaving the one thing that had quietly become the center of my life without my permission. So I did the only thing crisis management ever really teaches you. I told the truth, and I let someone else see me figure it out in real time. And judging by the way her face changed when I finally told her, she understood that immediately. The happiness disappeared. Not dramatically. Just enough. Enough to hurt. Enough to make me realize exactly how much I had to lose. If you've ever had to choose between the future you spent years building and the person who suddenly mattered more than all of it, stay with me because we're about to find out which one Ronan picks. For a moment after I told her, Isolde didn't move. She didn't speak. She didn't even blink. That calm expression she was known for didn't crack so much as it shifted. Slightly. Like something underneath had changed pressure. "Chicago," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. I nodded once. Yes. The word felt heavier than it should have. The vineyard behind us had gone completely dark now. Only the soft lights along the pathways remained, flickering gently like they didn't want to witness what came next. Isolde slowly let go of my hand. Not abruptly. Not angrily. Carefully. Like she was setting something fragile down before it broke in her grip. "I see," she said. And that was all. That simple sentence somehow carried everything she wasn't saying. I tried to read her face the way I usually did at work. But this wasn't work. This was different. "I haven't accepted it yet," I said. Her eyes lifted immediately. Sharp again. Focused again. "Yet," she repeated. I exhaled. "I didn't say yes." The pause. Then softer, "But you didn't say no either." She was right. And she knew she was right. That was the problem with Isolde Mercer. She always knew. The silence stretched between us. For the first time since the wedding began, there was no family nearby. No interruptions. No audience. Just distance. Real distance. "I didn't plan for this weekend to end like this," she said finally. "That makes two of us." A faint, humorless smile touched her lips. "I suppose I should apologize for bringing you into all of this." "All of this meaning?" Her eyes flicked toward me. "My family. The lies. The photographs." I almost smiled. "You mean the carefully curated emotional archive of Ronan Ashcombe?" That earned a small breath of laughter. But it didn't last. Because the weight between us was still there. "I didn't lie about the important part," she said quietly. I frowned slightly. "And what's the important part?" Her gaze held mine for a long moment. Long enough that I stopped hearing anything else. Then she said it. "You." That single word again. But this time it didn't feel like confession. It felt like surrender. My chest tightened. "I didn't bring you here because I needed a fake boyfriend," she continued. I stayed silent. "I brought you because I didn't want to stand next to him again and pretend I didn't feel anything." That landed harder than anything else she had said. I blinked. "Damien." She nodded. Her jaw tightened slightly at the name. "He thinks we ended because of timing. Because of life. Because it was mutual." She exhaled slowly. "I let him believe that because it was easier than explaining the truth. I already knew what was coming. But I still needed her to say it. I couldn't stand the idea," she said quietly, "of him thinking I still loved him." She stopped. Then corrected herself. "I couldn't stand him thinking I loved him more than I do." The pause. Then softer. "And I needed you there so I wouldn't have to lie through it again." The honesty in her voice didn't feel like strategy. It felt like exhaustion. Like she had been carrying this for years and only now realized she was allowed to put it down. I took a step closer. Not fast. Not demanding. Just enough. "I'm not your shield," I said gently. "I know. I'm not your distraction either." "I know that too." Her voice wavered slightly on the second one. That was new. I searched her face. For the CEO. For the strategist. For the woman who always had control. But all I saw now was someone standing at the edge of something she couldn't calculate her way out of. "So what am I?" I asked. Silence. Then she laughed softly. Not because it was funny. Because she didn't know how else to respond. "That's the problem," she said. Her voice dropped lower. "I don't think you are just one thing." That should have been simple. It wasn't. A distant burst of laughter echoed from the last remaining guests somewhere inside the resort. Life continuing. Oblivious. Unbothered. Here, everything felt suspended. I exhaled slowly. "I got an offer," I said again. Her shoulders tensed immediately. "I know." I frowned. "You know. I saw the email on your phone earlier when you left it on the table." Of course she did. Of course she had noticed. Of course, she had already been processing this before I even told her. That was Isolde. Always 3 steps ahead. Except this time, she wasn't. For the first time, she wasn't leading the conversation. She was waiting. That job is everything I worked for, I said. I know. And I haven't accepted it yet because I stopped. Because saying it out loud made it real. Because admitting it made it dangerous. Her eyes didn't leave mine. You don't have to say it carefully, she said quietly. I already know what you're trying not to say. That made me laugh once. But unbelieving. Do you? She nodded slowly. And for the first time since I met her, she looked uncertain. Not confused. Not lost. Just afraid of being wrong. You're trying not to say that you're here, she said, because of me. The words hung there. Heavy. Undeniable. I didn't answer immediately. Because I didn't trust myself to. Instead, I stepped closer. Close enough that there was no space left for guessing. No, I said quietly. Her eyes flickered. Hurt briefly. Then I added, I'm trying not to say I would be making a mistake if I left without knowing what this is. That stopped her completely. The air between us shifted. Something softened in her expression. Something real. I don't know what this is, she admitted. Neither do I. The pause. Then I reached out. Took her hand again. This time she didn't hesitate. Didn't question it. Didn't pull away. I do know one thing, I said. Her fingers tightened slightly around mine. What? My voice lowered. That I don't want to walk away from you in the middle of a sentence I haven't finished yet. A breath escaped her. Slow. Unsteady. Ronan. She said my name like it meant more than it should have. Like she had been holding it back for years and only now let it surface. I stepped closer again. Until there was no space left to misunderstand anything. You don't get to spend years talking about me to your entire family, I said softly, and then act surprised when I start wondering where I fit in it. That earned the smallest smile. Faint. Nervous. But real. I didn't realize I was that obvious, she said. You cropped me out of a photograph, I replied. That got a quiet laugh. A real one this time. And something inside her seemed to ease. Just slightly. I thought I was being subtle, she admitted. You were not. The pause. Then quieter. Good. That made me pause. Good. She looked down briefly. Then back up. I'm tired of being subtle. That was it. The breaking point. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just honest. She reached up slowly, fingers brushing my collar the same way she always did when she was thinking too much. Except this time, she didn't pull away. I don't want you to leave, she said. The words weren't loud. But they didn't need to be. I don't either, I admitted. Her breath caught. For a second she just looked at me. Like she was memorizing something she hadn't allowed herself to have before. Then she leaned in. Not rushed. Not uncertain. Just choosing. And I met her halfway. The kiss wasn't careful this time. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't complicated. It was the kind of kiss that came after everything had already been said. After all the questions. After all the avoiding. After all the pretending. When she pulled back, her forehead rested lightly against mine. And for the first time, she looked like she had stopped holding her breath. I don't want Chicago, she whispered. I closed my eyes briefly. Neither do I said. The pause. Then she smiled faintly. That's a problem. Yeah, I said softly. But it's a better one. For a moment we just stood there. Hands still linked. The world still moving somewhere far away from us. Until footsteps echoed behind us. We both turned. Evelyn Mercer stood at the edge of the terrace. Holding her champagne glass. Watching us with quiet satisfaction. Well, she said. I was beginning to think you two were going to make me wait until the next family wedding. Isolde groaned softly. Grandmother? What? Evelyn smiled. I taught your mother patience. I refuse to die before I teach you the same. Then she looked at me. Really looked at me. And nodded once. Try not to run away from her, she said simply. I met her gaze. I wasn't planning to. Good, she said. Because she would follow you anyway. And with that, She turned and walked back inside, leaving us alone again. This time, not in confusion, not in performance, but in something dangerously close to certainty. Isolde slipped her hand into mine, and didn't let go. Not even when the night finally ended. Not even when the world started moving again. Not even when Monday came. Monday morning arrived exactly the way Monday mornings always did. Except nothing about it felt the same. I called the recruiter before I even finished my coffee. Not because I'd rehearsed what to say. Because for the first time in my life, the decision didn't require rehearsing. I appreciate the offer, I told him. I'm not taking it. He pushed back the way recruiters always do. Reminded me what I'd be walking away from. The salary. The title. The kind of opportunity that doesn't repeat itself. He wasn't wrong. I let him finish. Then I said the only thing that actually mattered. There's something here I'm not willing to trade for it. He didn't understand. He didn't need to. When I hung up, I sat there for a long moment, staring at nothing in particular, waiting for the regret to show up. It never did. That should have unsettled me more than it did. I walked into the office an hour later expecting it to feel different. It didn't. Not at first. The same hallways. The same coffee machine that occasionally chose violence. The same assistant who still didn't trust me with the good stapler. Then I reached the executive floor, and Isolde was already there, reviewing a contract like the entire weekend hadn't happened. Composed. Unreadable to anyone who didn't know her. I knew her. She looked up when I walked in. Just briefly. Just enough. You're late, she said. By 2 minutes. Noted. For a moment, it felt exactly like every other Monday we'd ever had. Which was somehow the most reassuring thing in the world. Then, quieter, without looking up from the contract. Did you call him? Yes. And? I told him no. She didn't react the way I expected. No relief. No triumph. Just a small, steady breath, like something inside her had finally been allowed to settle. Good, she said simply. Then, after a pause, for the record, I would have understood if you'd said yes. I know. I wouldn't have liked it. I know that too. A faint smile. The kind she usually saved for boardrooms when she'd already won an argument nobody else realized was happening. There's a practical matter, she said eventually, setting the contract aside. There usually is with you. I can't have my director of crisis management reporting directly to me anymore. Not now. I'd expected this. Mostly because she was right, and because 4 years of working under her had taught me she rarely raised a problem without already holding the solution. You've already restructured something, haven't you? I restructured several things, she said. Last night, actually. You'll report to the board's operating committee starting next quarter. Same role. Same authority. Different line on an organizational chart nobody outside HR will ever look at twice. That's remarkably efficient for someone who spent the weekend falling apart on a terrace. I didn't fall apart, she said. I recalibrated. That's the same thing. It is not the same thing. But she was smiling when she said it, and for the first time all morning, the distance between Director Ashcombe and the woman who'd cropped an entire company photograph down to one person disappeared completely. By Wednesday, the office had noticed something was different, even if no one said it out loud. The way she stopped by my desk for things that didn't actually require her to stop by my desk. The way I started staying 5 minutes later, then 10, then long enough that her assistant began booking us for the same client calls without being asked. Nobody mentioned it. Everybody knew. It turned out the Mercers weren't the only family with a gift for noticing things before anyone admitted them out loud. Apparently, neither was the office. The following Sunday, Isolde's mother called to invite me to dinner. Not Isolde. I already know you're coming, she said before I could answer. I'm just being polite about it. I went. Evelyn met me at the door before I'd even rung the bell, holding a glass of wine she handed to me without asking if I wanted one. Took you long enough, she said. We've been together 4 days. I've been waiting 4 years, she said. Forgive me if my patience has limits. Paige, predictably, looked far too pleased with herself for someone who hadn't actually done anything except embarrass me publicly at a wedding. I told you I accelerated the plot, she said, raising her glass like she'd won an award. You destabilized a man's entire understanding of reality, I said. Same thing. Isolde, beside me, didn't even try to hide her smile this time. That was new too. Looking back, I think that was the moment I stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. Not the kiss on the terrace. Not the conversation about Chicago. A Sunday dinner, a glass of wine I hadn't asked for, a woman teasing me with the same confidence she'd had since the day she introduced me as the love of her life in front of a ballroom full of strangers. Because somewhere between the wedding and that dinner table, I'd stopped thinking of it as something fragile that needed protecting. It had simply become my life. The Mercer family didn't need another wedding to know the outcome. They knew at Sunday dinners. They knew in board meetings. They knew in the way Isolde stopped pretending she didn't smile when my name was mentioned. And they especially knew the day I turned down Chicago. Not because I didn't want it, but because I wanted something else more. Something quieter. Something harder to replace. On the next 4th of July, we returned to the same vineyard. No introductions. No explanations. No performances. Just Isolde walking beside me through the garden path, her hand already in mine like it had always belonged there. Evelyn watched us from the porch, sipping champagne, looking entirely too pleased with herself. Still terrible at pretending, she called out. Isolde didn't even look up. So are you, she replied. I smiled. And for the first time since everything began, I finally understood what she meant when she said she'd been talking about me all those years. She hadn't been building a story. She had been building a future she hadn't known how to name yet. And somehow, I had walked into it,